Hello, this is Tony from Great Ideas, and in this video we're going to look at how to download, install and configure Trellispark. So we're going to start by signing in to the Trellispark customer portal, and we will go to the Downloads tab, and here we will see the release of Trellispark. So to download Trellispark, we're going to go here and we are going to save the link, and we will drop it into our downloads folder on this computer, which is our dev computer, and then we will open the file. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to unzip the files to a folder I choose, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop it onto my temporary drive here, and I'm going to create a new folder called demo on my C drive, and this will be the target. This will be where I'm going to unzip everything to and link everything up. Okay, so let's see what we downloaded. So if I go to my C, temp, demo, you see that there are three folders. There's a folder containing compiled components, so these are websites and Windows services that we can install without having to make many changes. We have a database backup that we're going to restore in a minute, and we also have the source code for the user experience, so there were some components, and then the authentication models for standalone, Azure B2B and Azure B2C. So let's start with our database. So the first thing we're going to want to do is restore the database. So here I'm going to go to SQL Server, and you can see that the SQL Server minimum install release is 15.0. So this SQL Server 15.0 is clearly a SQL Server 2019 version. So you might find that you have issues if you're trying to restore it onto a version earlier than 2019. SQL Server 2022 is due for release later in 2022, and at that point we will be upgrading our SQL Server builds from 2019 to 2022, but for now our backup is going to work on our SQL Server 2019 database. So let's start here, and we are going to restore from a device, and we are going to go in here to our temp, to our demo and our database backups, and here is the database backup we want to install. And I need to name the database something unique on my computer, so for the sake of this presentation I'm just going to call it demo. I'm going to want to make sure that my data and log files have been updated, and for me I also need to remove the take a tail backup of the database. So what we're now going to do is we're going to restore our demo database that you pulled down from the download onto this SQL Server. Okay, so I now have a new database called demo. One thing that you're probably going to want to do here is create a new SQL Server login to give you access to that database. Okay, so I now want to create a login to enable me to access this database. I'm going to create a new login. I'm going to call it demo. I'm going to use SQL Server authentication. I need to give it a password, so just random character strings on 2. I'm going to want to map it to the demo database, and then in user mapping we'll give it access to demo, so we need DB owner public web user. So at this point I now have a user account called demo that has access to the demo database. Okay, so far so good. This is really simple, and we can now test this and make sure that we're running correctly. So I'm going to disconnect this user and reconnect to my database session using SQL Server authentication, demo, this password. I can now go in here and I can see some rows in here. Okay, so at this point I've successfully downloaded, installed and configured my database. So I'm already well on the way to installing and getting a working Trellispark solution. So let's look at the next step. I've got a database. The next thing I need is the REST API that will allow my user experience to interface to the database. Okay, so this is easy. I need to go into my Internet Information Services Explorer, and I need to do two things. First of all, I'm going to need to create an application pool for my demo database API, and I'm also going to need to create a website. So I'm going to start here with the application pool and add a new application pool. I'm going to call this demo API. Now, I need to use the .NET CLR version is no managed code. Okay, so this is important. We're running .NET 6, so I need to make sure I have the .NET 6 runtime installed on my managed server, and I'm going to create a new application pool that's not using managed code. The important thing to remember about this is the REST API is going to execute code on the server inside this new application pool. You can only have one website per application pool in this mode. Now, the other thing I'm going to want to do here is I'm going to change my settings. So I'm going to go into my advanced settings, and instead of using the standard app pool identity, I'm going to use my dev account. And what I recommend is change this from on demand to always running, then you're not waiting for your first request to actually start up the web service. So at this point, I've done everything I need to do to actually set up a basic application pool to run my REST API, and it's called Demo API. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and add a new website called Demo API. I'm going to tell it to select an application pool called Demo API. And then for the physical path, I'm going to go to my compiled code settings. So I'm going to go to temp, demo, compiled components. And the one I want is this one, right? It's the Trellispark REST API core dev release 28. So that's the one I'm going to use as my REST API. Now, our naming convention, we use TS for Trellispark, REST API because it's a REST API, .core for core functionality, and dev and release number is the release of the build that we have in terms of our internal pipelines. If you're going to submit a support request because you have an issue, one thing that you do need to remember is to tell us that we're looking at release, whatever this release number is. So at this point, I'm just going to go in here, test my settings. Everything looks good. I always recommend that you use HTTPS. And in this case, we're going to call it Demo API, and we'll use greatideas.com, and then assign the certificate. So at this point, I now have a new website called Demo API, and everything inside that website is up and good to go. Now, one thing that we are going to want to do in that demo website is we're going to need to point the config file so that it's using our new database installation. So what I want to do now is I want to go in and I want to open my website. So I'm going to go to my temp, demo, compiled components, and go to my app settings. And one thing that I'm going to need to do on my app settings is set up my connection string. So here I can just tell it to use my server. So however you want to supply that IP address. What's my initial database name? Well, my database name is just simply demo. My user is just called demo, and the password is that. Now I find having a minimum pool size of 10 and maximum pool size of 1,000 is great for most websites. If you've got like millions of visitors, you might want to set that max pool size higher if you've got a lot of volumes and so on. Also, I found it's useful to trust the server certificate in a dev environment. Depending on how you're setting your security up, you may want to not do that. But here I'm just saying, trust the local server certificate that's been generated locally. So that is pretty much enough to go. For the moment, the only database we support is MS SQL Server, and that will be enough to get you started. These other variables here that we can set in the config file will give you access to application insights, will give you an ability to provide reset email templates if you're using the standalone authentication model. And if you're using the message queues, then we'll talk about message queue functionality in a different video, but this is where you would set your default message queue. So essentially, the only thing you really have to set up to get you started is the connection string here for the Trellis database. So let's save that. And then I can come back here, stop and restart this website. So this web application now should be able to talk to my database. Now, one thing I'm going to want to do here is clearly set up my DNS so that demo.greatideas.com is pointing here. So the easy way to do that is I can tweak my hosts file. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a new option to my hosts file called Demo API, so that if I call Demo API greatideas.com, it will just route it locally. There we go, that's that done. So at this point, I've done all of the basic configuration for the REST API. I've created an application pool using no managed code, given it a user identity that's enabled to access my demo code. And I've created a website for my demo API here. So here's my demo API website. So at this point, I am ready to link up my user experience. So the user experience, because essentially it's a WASM client, isn't actually going to execute on the server. So I can put the user experience into an existing application pool. So for example, I have a Trellispark UX application pool here that's already set up for no managed code and using my local dev identity. So I can put it in an existing no managed code pool, assuming that the only thing that's going to be in here are these WASM clients, right? I can't put it in here. This thing, one pool, one website as far as the REST API is concerned. Here I can basically drop it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a demo user experience website and assign it to that pool. So here I'm going to add a website. I'm going to call it demo UX. I'm going to select my Trellispark UX application pool, the physical path. I can pretty much choose any of my targets, but the one I tend to sort of use as a starting point is the SA authentication model. So here I'm going to go to TSSA dev release 32 and use that. If you want to use the other authentication models, you'll need to set up your Azure Active Directory accounts first. But this gives us a quick and easy way into the solution. So here, again, I'm going to go to https demo ux.greatideas.com. And I want an SSL certificate, which is this. So if I test my settings, that all looks good. And that all looks good as well. And here I'm going to add another entry to my hosts file for my demo UX and save that. Okay, so I've got a demo user experience. Right, one thing I'm going to have to do is hook my demo user experience up to my demo API so that when I'm using my user experience, I'm actually accessing the REST API that's going to connect to the database. So let's have a look at how we do that. So we're going to need to go into our application settings again. So I'm going to go back to my temp directory. I'm going to go to my demo. I'm going to go to my compiled components. I'm using the SA build, so I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to my web root, and then I've got app settings. I'm going to open this up. And you can see I've got a few things to tweak here. So one thing that I'm going to need to change is this here, right? Which API URL is actually providing access to my website. So this is where I have my demo API.greatideas.com. My environment here is development. I'm going to use security question for password reset. The authentication mode is standalone, so those shouldn't really be changed. Once you have implemented an email server on your account, you can change this to use emails instead of security questions and answer. You can change the label for terms of use, your header text, privacy policy, and so on. So there's various other things that you configure. But the only thing that you really need to do out of the box is get this API URL right. So once I've done that, I can go back here. Refresh this. Here's my demo UX. Let's stop it, start it. Now let's actually see if we can connect to it. Okay, so this is looking good. I've got my demo UX, standalone authentication. So what I need to do now is sign myself up as a new user. Right now, it doesn't know who I am or anything, so I'm going to sign up a new user account. So I'm going to want to give it an email address. I'm going to want to give it a password. You want a name, password, so security question and answer. So I can basically put anything in here, right? So demo website. Okay, so if I need to do a password reset, it's going to ask me this question and it's expecting a response. So once I've got to here, let's sign up. Okay, and this has now taken me directly into my server owner workspace. So here, if I look in my system administration, if I look for my workspace data, you see I'm in the server owner workspace. This is the workspace GUID for the server owner workspace. I haven't assigned a license yet. I can go and have a look at my user experience creator. So the two user experiences that are available are server owner and workspace owner. I can look at managed workspaces. At the moment, there are no workspaces that we're managing. So this is where we would create business workspaces. I can go and have a look at application logs to see whether there have been any errors or events. And my home page is essentially this page here, which is essentially giving me a list of alerts and some guidance into how to actually get started within the application. So as you can see, the download, install, configure steps are actually very, very simple. Right? We're just going in, we're restoring a database, we're creating an application pool for our REST API, we're creating a website for our REST API, we're hooking up the application configurations. And as you can see, there's very little work involved here. You want to create yourself a nice password so that when you create your user account, you can then copy that password across. Typically, you're going to basically be changing the connection string here on the REST API to connect your REST API to the database that you've restored. And in the user experience, you're going to need to connect the user experience to the REST API. So as I say, very simple, very straightforward approach. If you want to do Azure Active Directory, either B2B or B2C, then you can change, instead of using the SA account, you can use one of the Azure builds and you'll be good to go. So that, in a nutshell, is installation and configuration of your Trellispark demo environment. So now that we've seen how to wire up the compiled code that we've given you, let's have a look at the source code that we gave you as well. So I'm going to go and open up my Visual Studio. I personally use Visual Studio 2022. I think this still works in 2019, but personally, I would always go for the latest version myself. I want to open a project or solution. And in this case, I'm going to go to my source code and I'm going to start with my SA. So I'm going to open up my user experience WASM with standalone authentication. I'm going to open up this project here. Okay, excellent. So I now have my SA project open. So what I want to do here is I want to go into my root. I need to go to my app settings JSON file, and remember I need to change this configuration. So I need to change this to demo api.greatideas.com. Okay, so at this point, this website should now compile and run. So let me just execute this. So as you can see, I am building the local host, the demo version of my website locally on this computer here. And if I use the same accounts that I used on my previous website, you'll see it connects up to the same database. So I can remember what I used on the build up here. I go to my user administration. Oh yeah, I just used my Tony@greatideas.com. So I'm putting in my username and password, signing in. Now you note this time we're straight into the same website. So this is the same website, same database that we entered here through the compiled version of the website. We're looking at the same basic information here. So if I go into my UX Creator, I'm seeing the same information. So let's now expand our example a little bit. And what we want to do now is we want to link in the individual components. So here I'm going to go in and I am going to add an existing project. And this time I'm going to add in the WASM components. And then in my dependencies, I want to remove the dependency on the WASM components package, which is this one here. And I want to add a project reference to my WASM components. And now I could go in here, for example, and put some breakpoints in. So let's add a breakpoint on my instance builder. So here, let's add a breakpoint here. Okay, so just to prove that you can actually get in here and edit your user experience. Now we'll click on IIS Express. So we're debugging the user experience code. So I'm going to sign in. And you see I'm being taken into my instance builder code inside my database. So essentially inside this running project, we are able to modify any of the components within the application. So if I want to change how rows look, I can come into my row page and I can change how my row definitions are laid out. And as you know, we have an extensive video and documentation that describes how you can actually go in here and modify your user experience to produce any desired user experience functionality you want. One thing to be aware of, if you're using this build, there is a dependency on the Telerik projects. So one of the things that you are going to need a license for is the Telerik UI for Blazor. This build is using version 2.29 and the Telerik report viewer Blazor, which is using 15.2.21. So if you want to come in here and build and change and customize the user experience, you are going to need to purchase your own Telerik licenses and install these products on your own development machine. But hopefully this video has given you a good introduction into how to actually go to the website and how to pull down the latest release of the build. And once you've got that release and restored it to a demo environment, how to restore the database backup, how to then go to the compile components and wire up the REST API. So bear in mind, this is not something we're giving you as source code. This is, licensed intellectual property of great ideas, but it's absolutely necessary for you to connect your user experience to your database. And then last but not least, you need to configure the user experience you want to connect to your REST API call. So we're restoring the database. We're going into Internet Information Services. We are creating an application pool, called Demo API. We're using the Demo API application pool to create a website that points to our REST API core release. The one thing that we need to configure correctly in the REST API core release is the connection to the database that you're going to use for your demonstration environment. Once you've done that and configured your REST API, so you can create a user experience website and you can share application pools amongst your user experience websites. You cannot share application pools across your REST API websites. The only thing that you really need to configure on your user experience websites is that you need to make this change here to make sure that your API URL points to the REST API that you've already created. In this environment here, I've used my hosts file to basically map my Demo API and Demo UX websites. So these are the two websites I created to localhost. So this thing is all now running locally and I can actually demo the working environment on my local computer. We also gave you a quick example in terms of how to use the Visual Studio to connect to the two projects that you've been given. So here in this case, we opened up the standalone authentication project. We connected that to the WASM components project and demonstrated that they're both basically signing in the same way with the same user account to the same database. And so if I want to modify any aspect of the user experience, I can do so either through data by using the UX creator, or if I actually want to change the way a particular component looks and works. So for example, I don't like the way strings work. I can come in here, I can find the string implementation, and I can basically come in here and change the implementation of how strings are being displayed, saved, and working. So this gives us tremendous flexibility. It's all in one zip file. It's all running at a consistent version level. The only thing you're going to need to be able to create and modify and change the custom source code for the custom user experience is the Telerik licenses. So you are going to need to purchase those licenses. If you want to get a copy of the Telerik Blazor component licenses, you need to go to the Telerik website, which is telerik.com, and you need to purchase their licenses. So hopefully that's given you a quick introduction into how to download, configure, install a Trellispark environment and how to get in there so that you can now start customizing any aspect of the build and the user experience.
To learn more about Great Ideas products and solutions, visit greatideas.com. That's great ideas with a Z.com. Thanks.